Hello there, and welcome to another Unity tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to learn about render textures. So we'll start by first creating a minimap on our UI using a camera that follows the position of the player so that the minimap displays what's immediately around them. And then we'll also create a level overview map that shows the entire level that the player can toggle on or off by using a custom input. So I'm starting this video with a canvas in my scene. So you want to make sure you've got a canvas with the canvas scaler, having its scale mode set to scale with screen size, the reference resolution set to full HD, so 1920 by 1080, the screen match mode set to match width or height, and the match value set to 0.5. I've also got this script which I'll be modifying later. You can create that following one of my previous videos. I'll leave a link in the description. You could also just create this script fresh and copy down the code that we write that's relevant to what we do in this video. So I'm going to start this video by, I'll expand my canvas first. We'll right click on the canvas and create a new empty object. And we'll call this object minimap. Now I'll also go to 2D mode in my scene view, and I'm just going to double click on my canvas so we can see the entire canvas here. And I'll select my empty object, so there it is in the middle. Now, I want to kind of rearrange my UI here. I want my minimap to sit in the top left, and I want my timer display to keep its position relative to the minimap when the canvas scales with different screen sizes. So we'll start by repositioning our minimap. So I'm going to change the anchor point first. So we'll click on the anchor in the inspector. I'll hold Shift to also change the pivot point and Alt to snap the position, and I'm going to select the top left corner anchor. So we'll change the size of this first. So this is going to be a container for the timer display and the minimap texture. So we'll set the width to 350, which is how wide our minimap will be, but we need a bit more height. So we'll go 450 for the height. Now, I also don't want it to be tucked into the corner here and hugging the edge of our screen. So I'm going to buffer it from the left of the screen by giving the X 50 pixels space, and then for the Y we'll say minus 50 pixels, which will keep a nice little margin from this container. So the next thing we need to do is actually move our timer display into the minimap container. So we'll do this by dragging it onto our minimap and making the timer display a child of the minimap, and we'll just zero out the X position and the Y position. Actually, we'll change the anchor point. I want it to hug the bottom of this container. So I'll click on the anchor, again hold Shift to change the pivot point and left Alt to change the position. And then I'll select the bottom central anchor. So we can leave the width and height here, but I want it to sit a bit up from the bottom of the container here. So I'm going to put 25 for the Y position, which if we zoomed right in and moved slightly so you can see there's a bit of a buffer there now. Cool. So the next thing we need to do is actually create our minimap texture. So we'll right click on our minimap object, go down to UI, and here we want to create a raw image. Okay, so this stores a texture rather than a sprite. So a regular image stores a sprite, but this is going to store a texture, and we're going to send our render texture to this raw image here. But before we do that, let's change our transform properties for this object. So I'm going to anchor this and change its pivot point to the top of our minimap container. So I'll click the top center anchor point while holding Shift and Alt. And next, we'll just change the width to 350 and the height to 350 as well. Now, we can't pass it a texture yet. We haven't created our render texture, but I do want this object to have a black outline around it. So I'm going to click on Add Component, and I already had it there. So we'll look up Outline and then just add that. You can see that there's a, if we zoom in here, very slight black line around the edge. So I'm just going to change the values to 5 and -5 just to make the outline a bit thicker, and we can see the outline a bit more prominently now. Okay, so let's create the render texture that we're going to need. I'm going to go to the project window right click on the assets folder, go to create, and select a render texture, which is right in the middle of the menu here. And we'll just call this render texture, we'll call it render text underscore minimap. Now in the properties for this render texture, all I'm going to change is the size. So this is a texture. Think of it like an image with and this is the resolution. So the larger the resolution, the more pixels there will be in the image, meaning the more detail will be captured. So I'm going to set this to 1024 by 1024. And that's all we need to change for the render texture. So now we actually need to send something, a live feed from the game, to the render texture. And we do this by using a secondary camera. So I'm going to right click in the hierarchy and create a new camera. And we'll call this camera underscore minimap. And you'll notice something's happened as soon as we created that camera. The game view is no longer displaying what our main camera sees. And that's because if we look at our camera properties, that's due to the depth settings between these two cameras. So with the depth, cameras with a larger number will be rendered on top of cameras with a smaller number. Now, when you create a new camera, by default, it will have a depth of 0. And the main camera, if we find our player and select that to compare, has a depth of -1. So the camera we just created is being rendered on top of this camera here. So for our main camera, I'm going to change its depth to 0. And then for our mini-map camera, I'm going to change its depth to -1. And as soon as we do that, you can see our game view shows what our main camera sees. And then we can see what our mini-map camera sees when we have it selected. So now to send what this camera is seeing here to our render texture, there's this property in the camera component called TargetTracker. You can see it takes a render texture. So I'm going to drag my render texture from the project settings into that property. And our render texture, if we select it in the project window, now sees what our camera sees. So if we move our camera, the render texture is going to update and also display that. So now that we've got our render texture actually displaying something, let's assign it to our minimap image. So back in the hierarchy, I'm going to select our raw image, which we should rename actually. Let's rename this object to minimap texture. And then after that, I'm going to drag my render texture from the project window into the texture property for the raw image. And as soon as I do that, you can see that this UI element is now displaying what our minimap camera sees. So if we select our minimap camera, let's go out of 2D mode and just find our camera. Oh, it's way out in the scene, so let's reset it to where the game world is. And what we want this camera to do is we want it to face down. We want it to have to be looking straight down at the player. So we'll move it up slightly. I'm going to hit E to show us the rotation gizmo, and I'm going to hold Control while I rotate camera on the X-axis. So it has a value of 90 degrees, which means it'll be looking straight down. And now if I press W to bring back our movement gizmo, and we bring the camera up, we can see on our minimap display that we can see the player and everything around it. Okay, cool. So we basically have our minimap now, but if we hit play to test this, you'll notice something. When our player moves around, the camera is static, it stays still, so it doesn't follow our player, and the player can actually wander off the minimap. So there are two ways we can address this depending on how you want your minimap to work. So the first method is if we grab our minimap camera and we actually make it a child of our player capsule so that it follows the player around, then obviously, it's going to follow the exact position of the player. Now, one thing we want to make sure here, I'm just going to change gizmos to local. You want to make sure that the local up direction for the camera is the same as the local forward direction for the player. So now if we hit play, you'll notice that the camera actually follows the player around, But the other thing about this method is if we rotate the player as well, the camera also rotates to face the same direction as the player. But what if you don't want the minimap to rotate the same direction as the player? Well, that's where the second method comes in, and all it needs is a very, very simple script. So first, I'm going to unparent the minimap camera from the player. Then on our minimap camera, I'm going to select Add Component, and I'm going to start typing the name of a new script, which we'll call TargetTracker. I'll select New Script, confirm the name as TargetTracker, and select Create and Add. Then we'll open our new script from the project window. Okay, so here's our new script in Unity. Let's get rid of the start function. And we aren't actually going to use the update method either, but we are going to use a method called late update. And late update basically is called at the end of the frame after the update method has already been called. So I'll change the method summary here, and we'll say late update is called at the end of every frame update. Now we are actually going to need two variables here. First one will be a serialized private variable of the type transform, and we'll call that target. Give it a tooltip, and we'll just say the target to be tracked. The next variable will also be a serialized private variable of the type vector3, and we'll call this position offset. We'll give that variable a tooltip, and we'll just say the offset position from the target. Next, in the late update, we're just going to write one very simple line, and we're going to say transform.position is equal to target.position plus position offset. So we're updating the position of this game object that the script is attached to the same position as the target, but then we're adding an offset to that. So let's save the script and go back into Unity. Okay, so I'm back in Unity. I'm going to select my minimap camera where my target tracker script is attached to. Now we need to pass it a target, so this is going to be the player object. So let's drag our capsule into that variable there. Next, we'll give the camera an offset. Now I don't want it to be offset on the X or Z axis. I just want to maintain its height. So it's currently at 14 above 0. So I don't know, we'll just say maintain 10. We can change this during play mode to see what heights we actually like. So let's hit play. Okay, so now I'm in play mode, and you can see the camera still follows the player's position, but if I turn, the camera does not turn. So it's keeping like a cardinal, or it's keeping aligned with cardinal north sort of thing. Now if we change our Y value here, you can see that, whoa, that jumped quickly. You can see that we can actually change the height that the camera maintains. And if we really wanted to, we could change the X value and the Z value as well. So we could actually completely offset the minimap if we wanted to for whatever reason. Okay, so one other thing you might want to do for your minimap camera is, so if I just show you, for example, if we move the camera so that we see the edge of the map, we can actually see like the skybox there. So if you want to prevent that, one thing I like to do is on the camera component, we set the clear flags property to solid color. And then I'm just going to crank up a color here, and I just like black usually. And now when we get to the edge of the game world, instead of seeing the skybox, we just see the color black. Okay, so we've finished implementing our minimap now. So let's begin implementing a level overview map. So we'll start by creating a new render texture. So in my project window, I'll right click on my assets folder, go to create and select render texture. So we'll name this render texture render text underscore overview map. And then we'll just change the size of our render texture to 1024 by 1024. Rightio, so next we'll create our camera. So I'm going to right click in the hierarchy window and go to create a new camera. And we'll call this camera underscore overview map. So first we'll set the depth to -1, and then we'll set the clear flags to solid color, and we'll go with black. We'll drag in the render texture we just created, render text overview map. Then we'll just reset the transform and then rotate our camera so that it's 90 degrees on the x-axis and push it up to a level where we can actually see what's going on. Let's go 15. Now we do need to change one more setting for this camera, but first let's create the UI element for our overview map. So I'm going to right click on my canvas in the hierarchy window, go to UI and create a new raw image, and we'll call this overview map. Okay, let's change the scene view to 2D mode and just focus on our canvas here. So here's our overview map in the center of our canvas. Now I do actually want this to be in the center of the canvas, but I want it to be much, much larger. So we'll change the width and the height to 1000 by 1000. Then next we'll pass the render texture overview map into the texture for the raw image component. So now we can see what the camera sees on the UI. And last, we'll just add an outline to this UI element and give it dimensions of 5 and -5, just to emphasize the window a bit more. Okay, so now that we can see what the camera sees, let's select our overview map camera. Now, see how the camera view is in 3 dimensions? I want to change that so it's being projected in 2D. So on the camera component here, we'll change the projection setting from perspective to orthographic. And if I go out of 2D mode and just focus on our camera here, we can see that the frustum that's being painted in the scene view has changed from like a cone or, like a triangular prism or whatever, a frustum, to a rectangle here. And that corresponds with the size that we pass it. You can see as we change this size value now, we can see more or less of the map. So I'm just going to change the size so we can see everything just about. I'll just change it to 15. That seemed like a good size. So let's hit play and see how that works. Okay, so I'm in play mode, and although we have no way of turning the map on or off, you can see if I move the player around, we can see him moving around on the UI map here, as well as the enemies that I have moving around the scene as well. Now, one issue that I can already identify is that in my UI, I have a pause menu. And when the player toggles the pause menu on or off, they can't see it because the map is being displayed over it. So to fix that, all I need to do is drag the pause menu and make it the lowest child of our HUD canvas. And now the pause menu gets displayed over the map. Okay, so all that's left to do now is implement the toggling functionality for the overview map. So I'm going to open the GameHUD script. And if you don't have this script already, you can just create a new script. Okay, so I have my HUD script open. And the first thing I'm going to do is add a new serialized private game object variable, and we'll call it overview map. And we'll give this a tooltip as well. So in my tooltip attribute, I'm going to say a reference to the overview map game object in the UI for the scene. Okay, so next we need to define a new public method, and I'm going to define this right underneath my toggle pause menu method, because it's going to be another public method, also with a Boolean return type. And we'll call this toggle overview map. Now this is going to be 2 very simple lines, and we'll say overview map dot set active, and then an exclamation mark, and we'll say overview map dot active self. So that's going to pass the opposite of the overview map's active state to the setActive method, turning it on if it's off and off if it's on. Then underneath that, we'll just return the active state of the overview map. So we'll say return overview map dot active self. So next we'll go up to our start method, And I'm going to open an if statement here, and we'll check if overviewMap.activeSelf is equal to true. Then we'll just call our toggle overview map method to turn it off. Then underneath the start method, I'm going to inherit the void update method. And we'll bring the summary in for the update method, which is update is called once per frame. Actually, we should give the method we just wrote a summary as well. And we'll just say toggles the overview map. Okay, going back to the update method now. In the update method, we want to check if an input has been pressed. So we'll say if input.getButton down is equal to true. And the input we're going to look for here, we're actually going to set this up. It's going to be a custom input, and we'll call it toggle map with a capital T, a space, and a capital M. And if that input is pressed, we're just going to call toggle overview map. Okay, so let's save the script and go back into Unity to set up our custom input and assign our overview map variable. Okay, I'm back in Unity. So let's select our canvas where my GameHUD script is attached, and there's a new variable for the overview map. So let's drag it from our hierarchy into that variable slot there. Now we do need to define the custom input that we just referred to in our script, but I just noticed something that's also pretty important. If I go to the console window, we can see we have this message being printed, which says there are 3 audio listeners in the scene, and we need to ensure there's always exactly 1 in the scene. So we'll select the camera overview map as well as the camera mini map cameras that we created in this video. And you can see there's an audio listener component attached to them. So we'll just right click on that and select remove component so that the only audio listener is attached to the main camera. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is define our custom input. So to define inputs, we need to go to the project settings. So let's open the edit menu and then access project settings. And this is what the project settings window looks like. Actually, we can dock it. I'll dock it right here next to our scene view. So then we want to select the input manager and open the axes array that's defined here. And here are all the inputs that we've used over the last few videos as well. This is where they are defined by default. So to add a new one, we just need to change the number and extend it by 1. So I'm going to extend it to 19. And then if we scroll right down to the bottom, we can see it's just copied the one that was defined before. So there's 2 cancels now. So we'll expand the bottommost one and we'll customize this to match our needs. So first we'll change the name to match what we used in the script, which was toggle space map with a capital T and a capital M. Now in this case, because we're only defining like a button input rather than an axis, we only need to worry about the positive button inputs. So I'm going to change the positive button, and I'm just going to say tab, which is the tab key on the keyboard. Then we can also change the alternative positive button. So this is assigned to a joystick button, which will map differently to different controllers. I'm just going to have the alternative button as the letter M on the keyboard. Now we shouldn't have to worry about any of these other properties as long as the type is set to key or mouse button. So now that we've assigned everything and defined that custom input, let's hit play and test it out. Okay, so we can see at the start of the game, the overview map disappears. And now if I hit my tab key, it opens up. And if I open the pause menu by pressing escape, it opens up over the top and I can hit resume and it disappears. And then if I hit tab again, my overview map disappears again. If I hit M, it opens back up. And while it's open, I can still move and look around as well and just kind of guide myself by looking at the overview map. So that's all for this video. I hope you found it useful. If you did and you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. And if you'd like to see more game development tutorials and content like this, then you could also subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.